Well, welcome back from break. Of course, mothersraisingsons.com is the membership site. And I'm Scot Conway, Ph.D., J.D. There's a whole crazy resume connected to me. And I'm here talking specifically about raising our next generation of boys. Now, in the last hour, we got to define the problem. Now, it's crucial, of course, to have a solid definition of the problem. Because if you don't know exactly what the problem is, you can't solve the problem. So if I were to give you a test, and on this test, I said, all right, question number 1. 2 plus something equals something else. But I'm not really sure what the second something is, but you can be graded on whether or not the answer you get is right. And then the spelling word is some kind of a feline. It's actually a specific type of feline. Might be a little cat, might be a big cat. I'm not really totally sure yet, but you will be graded upon whether or not you pick the right word and you spell it correctly. That would be a totally unfair test. How could you pass that test? You need to have the problem defined. And so if I give you a word problem for math, and instead of giving you exact numbers, I'm giving some and a lot, but you have to come up with an exact answer, because if you don't come up with the exact answer, that's going to affect your grade. That would be totally unfair. And so defining the problem, understanding the depth of exactly what the problem is, so that we have some precision in what we're talking about. So we know what it is we're trying to solve. So we can take this test and we have a shot at passing the test, because we know what the questions are. We know precisely what problem it is we're trying to solve. Then we know if our solution is actually the solution to the problem. We don't have to guess. That's part of the beauty of spending some time on the problem. What is the problem? What kind of collateral problems, called unintended consequences, which is when you solve one problem, and in the process of solving this problem, you create another problem, very often a bigger problem. Or at least a problem that, if it's not bigger in the sense that it's doing more damage, is bigger in the sense that it's harder to solve. So how do we solve this problem? We've talked about so many of the challenges that mothers face in general. The single mothers face. The mothers face when there is a man still in the kid's life, and she just hopes to God that her son doesn't turn out to be that much like him. And she recognizes part of the problem that she faces is when her boy looks around his life for man, she understands, well, probably the first definition of man he's going to have is going to be his father. And she doesn't want him to turn into that man. So what we're after here is the next generation of great men. We are trying to raise the next generation of great men. And greatness by 21st century standards is different than greatness was in the 1800s. A man could have been great in the 1800s and still been sexist and racist, and then that wasn't considered that much of an issue then. I would personally argue that it should have been, that it was no more right or wrong then than it is right or wrong now. Just then they didn't recognize it as wrong because it was so common. Now we recognize it as wrong. So I would contend, okay, whatever it is masculinity should hold, at some point there should be a recognition of some level of equality between the sexes, some level of equality between the races, some level that all human beings are generally equal in some way, shape, or form. And then what does that mean? Does that mean the same? Doesn't mean the same, but equal doesn't have to be the same. In fact, equal and fair are sometimes two different things. So if I've got a couple of kids and say one of them's 5 and one of them's 15, and it's time to have dinner, and so in order to be fair, I keep the portions the same, and I give each of them the same amount of food. Is my 5-year-old likely to eat the same amount of food as my 15-year-old? Now, which one of my kids has more intrinsic value, the 5-year-old or the 15-year-old? They're both the same. They're both equal. But exactly how that shows up is different. The food needs of one is very different than the food needs of the other. And so there's the equality, but the equality isn't the same. There's clearly a difference, and that I have to treat them differently. I have to behave differently toward them. There's different priorities and different needs. different ways of connecting, different ways of relating, different levels of freedom based upon who I'm dealing with, right? So we all get that part. And so somewhere, though, in this mix of raising the next generation of great men, we recognize, okay, there's differences. People are different. People have different values. People have different priorities. That groups of people tend to have different bents, different statistically true behaviors, not universally true behaviors, statistically true behaviors. Like here's a simple, obvious one. Are men generally taller than women? If you grab the bell curve of women and the bell curve of men, and you grab that middle chunk, will the men in that middle chunk be taller than the women in that middle chunk? That answer is yes, they will be. Will the men in that middle chunk be stronger than the women in that middle chunk? Yes, they will be. Will the women in that middle chunk be more flexible, physically flexible, than the men in that middle chunk? Yes, they will be. And so there's statistical truisms. Does that mean there's no such thing as a woman who is taller than a man? Of course not. Obviously. You get to the taller side of women and the shorter side of men, and the whole thing flips. Now, if you want to go grab hundreds of couples where the woman's taller than the man, those will not be too hard to find. So those are statistical truisms. Then there's some absolute truisms. Some absolute truisms have a tendency to be biologically defined. So say you know a married couple, and you find out this married couple is having a baby. Do you have to guess who's pregnant, the husband or the wife? Or you find out they just had a baby. And in the just had a baby, you find out that one of them is staying home to breastfeed the child. You have to guess whether that's the husband or the wife. Or you find out that it's a problem pregnancy, and one of them is still at work. You have to guess which one's probably still at work if there's a problem pregnancy. So some things are biologically defined. You understand this. So there's some statistical truisms and there's some absolute truisms. So in this mix, how do we show up with what masculinity is? How does masculinity show up in an egalitarian society where men and women are equal? But obviously they're not the same. Biologically, they're not the same. Socioculturally, they're not the same. I mean, you can pick certain types of movies and see, okay, if I give everybody movie tickets, and here's the only rule is you have to go by yourself. If I give everyone a whole bunch of DVDs, and the only rule is you have to pick a DVD to watch by yourself, would you be surprised if there was a statistical difference between what the men chose and what the women chose? Would it also surprise you if some women chose what most men chose and some men chose what most women chose? That shouldn't surprise you either. So there's places where there's overlap, but the statistical difference kind of skews. Might there be types of movies where neither men nor women may find them appealing in overwhelming numbers, but almost only men are interested, or almost only women are interested, even if it's just a minority on one side or the other? Would that surprise anybody either? You go to the store, you find out who's buying makeup to use for themselves. Would anyone be surprised to find out that seems somehow to be mostly women? Would anyone be surprised to find out that on average, women have more items of clothes in their closet and more pairs of shoes than the average man? Would that surprise anybody? So there's a whole bunch of things that are statistically true and in some way connect to masculinity and femininity, sometimes in ways that we can't quite clearly understand unless you have a model for that. Now here is what women find attractive in men, whether they realize it or not. This is part of why you have these great, fantastic, amazing men in the friend zone, and you have these jerks that keep sparking attraction in women and keep seeming to get the girl, and girl after girl after girl, and even when they have a girl, they seem to go get other girls. And that just seems to be the pattern. And in fact, I recently was having a discussion with a reporter as she was interviewing me for a national magazine. Hasn't seen print yet, so I don't have much to talk about other than the reporter was interviewing me about this very subject. And one of the things she remarked is, when you're in high school and you fall for the football captain and he turns out to be a jerk and you're 16, I mean, that doesn't surprise you. You're 16, you're a teenager, you don't know any better. But this is what she remarked with some passion. Why does this happen to 40-year-old women? Which she uttered with a level of passion that made me wonder who exactly she's talking about. Maybe some friends of hers, maybe herself, I don't know. But there was certainly an intensity there. A frustration that this is still happening to women. It happens to the teenage girls, it happens to the college women, but it's still happening in the 30s and the 40s. What's going on? And I was able to explain that what's happening is when you have a man who is self-confident in his masculinity, that he does not need her approval or her attention for him to know that he's a man. That he has some external standards for him to use to make that determination. Now, if sometimes it's something as mathematically clear as wealth, or as superficial as status, or something as hard to measure maybe as power. Wealth, status, and power tend to be things that men will interpret and internalize as that means I'm manly. Even though obviously women can have wealth, and women can have status, and women can have power. But when women have wealth, status, and power, it doesn't usually make a woman feel like, well, this makes me feminine. She likes it, but it doesn't go to the feminine side of her identity. So you understand the difference there. It can be a great thing and a good thing, and a thing that you pursue and a thing that you achieve, but not make a woman feel feminine. That's not where she derives femininity from, but a lot of men derive masculinity from that, even though women can be at exactly the same level he's at. Women can even be above him on that, but because he derives some sense of a feeling of masculinity from it, he's externally referenced. And some of that can be good in the fact that you do have an objective reference. Some of that is bad in that, well, wealth is just money and stuff. Status is status in some kind of a pecking order. And power, what does he mean by power? Typically it means that he gets to call the shots somewhere. Well, a lot of times that can only be based on a job or a business. Well, what happens if the economy goes south and he loses his business? Is his net worth his self-worth? What if he loses his status as boss? He loses his power over employees? Does that mean he's no longer a man? Well, if that's what he's basing it on, that's what it'll feel like to him. That can't be the answer, of course. If that's the answer, that means you can't be a man without wealth, status, and power. So you see how this begins to come together and how you think about it. So what is it? There's a model that you can use when you're raising your sons, that you can teach to them, that you can walk out for yourself, that you can remark on and interact with. And we'll get to that more in a moment. So why is it the jerks can pull this off and the good guys can't? Well, a lot of times the good guys, they so desperately want her approval, and they're nice people, and so they value her opinion. But there's a huge difference between I value your opinion and I need your approval. I would like for you to approve of me because I'm doing well, but I don't need you to approve of me in order for me to know I'm doing well. And there's so many things in life that can look very similar, but somewhere in that internal processing in the heart, it's very different. I desire for everyone in this room to get value from me because I'm teaching some really good stuff. But I don't need you to all come up afterwards and say, oh, wow, Dr. Conway, that was amazing stuff. Thank you for teaching. I got so much insight. If nobody does that at the end, I still know this is good stuff. I know this has been transformational in my own life. I know this has been transformational for the other people who I know have learned it. I don't need any given person's approval. Now imagine if I had one person who disapproved. A colleague of mine was talking to a room of 200 people, and there's one woman in the back who really didn't seem to like what he was saying. And he's so fixated on her, and he's at home with his wife after. He's like, I don't know what I can do to reach this woman. I think I'm doing a pretty good job. And she said, honey, how many people are in this room? He said, well, a couple of hundred. He said, why are you fixating on the one person? You don't know what's going on in her life. You have 199 other people that you are serving. Pay attention to everybody. She's not the only person in the room. So it's having these standards and being able to pay attention. And in his case, he realized, and this is part of why he tells the story, that I was looking at the one person who seemed to disapprove, and I was basing my opinion on how it was going on the worst person in the room. If you have an external reference, by standards, you don't need any given person's approval, especially not that one person in the back of the room that doesn't seem to like you very much. So what are we after here? A man who knows what being a man is really about, what it really means, a man ready for women. So you want him to be the nice guy, but the nice guy so often ends up in the friend zone, and why is it the jerk is the one that keeps sparking the attraction? One of the more interesting complaints that I heard a woman make is that you go to the bad boy, and that's how she defined it, because he's a jerk. But she called him the bad boy. So you go for the bad boy because he's exciting. Yeah, there's attraction, there's energy, there's chemistry. But then he's a jerk, and so he hurts you. So you leave the bad boy, and you go find like a nice guy. But the nice guy's boring, and you get sick of it, and you leave that, and you want some excitement, you want some spark, you want some romance, and so you end up back with another bad boy. But he's a jerk, and you keep going back and forth, and it was driving her nuts. Well, what if you had a good man who might normally, under ordinary circumstances, end up in the friend zone, who could spark the same spark as the man who too commonly ends up being a jerk? Now, why is it, by the way, the jerks can do this? They don't need her approval because to him she's a plaything. Why do you need your toys to approve of you? She's not a partner to have a relationship with. She's an object there for his pleasure. And he might even have fanciful notions of having a relationship, but the fanciful notions he's having of having a relationship is that feeling of conquest, that feeling of energy, that feeling of having her there for his pleasure that he kind of fantasizes might continue on, and then of course it doesn't, because that kind of chemistry, that kind of spark rarely lasts. It has. I've seen cases where it has. There's a reason it does when it does. But the newly universal experience of most people is that sooner or later that part fades, and then this is what you've got left. And if he's a jerk, this part's going to melt down. So, how does the good boy do that? By having an external set of standards that he can use, that he can base his behavior and his standards side by side and look at those standards, look at his behavior, and he knows if he's doing it, whether she approves or not. Now, very often, she would approve if she thought about it, but, mostly we don't know enough details to know whether or not we truly approve. He doesn't need her attention for him to know he's a man. He knows, if I've got these things going for me, I know I'm doing the man thing well. And to have a man ready for women, which includes not just in romance, but includes working side by side with women, honoring women, respecting women, because that jerk who only sees the women in his life as playthings, as there for his pleasure, if he has to work with women, guess what? He still doesn't see them as fully human. He still doesn't see them as fully valuable, as equal to himself in value and worth, or equal in worth to men in general. That's one of the big problems with the church. But if you have a man who's a knightly man, he understands the intrinsic value of women is equal to the intrinsic value of men. He understands the intrinsic value of other people is equal to the intrinsic value of himself. This is the phrase I often teach. It's not about me, it's about everyone. And I'm one of everyone. Okay, if you want to get that down, it's not about me, it's about everyone. Now make sure you get this part too. And historically, I seem to run into a lot of women that miss this last part. And so write it down, but live it out too. Okay, it's not about me, it's about everyone. And I'm one of everyone. And I'm one of everyone. What that part means is you have to remember you're one of the people too. You can't ignore yourself in the mix and just keep sacrificing yourself any more than you would ask someone else to keep sacrificing for you. And sometimes women who both have jobs and have marriages and have children have a tendency to just so sacrifice. They forget you are one of the everyone. You can't exclude yourself. and say, it's not about me, it's about them. All of them. No, it's everyone. You're one of the everyone. So it's important to take care of yourself somewhere in the mix too. And this, by the way, seems to be a global issue. I talked about my colleague that runs into some of these things worldwide with women having guilt. Another thing he runs into worldwide is women who don't take the time to take care of themselves because they're so busy being a wife and a mother, as well as whatever job that they're holding and other things that they're doing. So a man ready for women, a man ready to work side by side, shoulder to shoulder with women, and have that not be an issue for him. A man ready to be able to spark this kind of attraction in women and still behave himself honorably and properly. A man who's ready for a wife, that he's ready to be a husband, whatever that means. And I have a whole system of that called YORI, Y-O-R-I, that he understands it's you, others, relationships, intimacy. Relationship intimacy. You, others, relationship intimacy. It's a Japanese boy's name, by the way, that means trust. It means I can believe you, that when you tell me things, I can trust that at least you think it's true, so I can believe you, and I can count on you. And so if you have a man who shows up and he knows how to do love, he knows how to give attention, he knows how to show respect, he knows how to be playful, he knows how to cooperate. You have a man who shows up, he knows how to do affectionate romance, he knows how to do team leadership, he knows how to provide material support, he knows how to be a good team member, he knows how to have conversation. He understands conversation is about connection, not information. Sometimes you can have long conversations and there is no point. The point is to connect. The point isn't something that she has to tell you that you need to know. Sometimes men need to know these things. And you have a man who shows up and he has these skills, and he knows how to do them, and he knows how to do them well. Then he can be more ready to be a husband. A man who's ready for a family. He's ready to be a parent. He has these internalized models. He knows what being a dad is about. He understands the difference between being daddy and being dad and being father. And the various roles that will be shifting in him as his children grow older. And sometimes just a simple thing is this. Now, I had mentioned at one time that I'm not a huge sports fan. I like going to live games more than I like watching it on television. Now, I will watch stuff on television sometimes, especially if it's like important. If a team's in the playoffs, or I'll watch the Super Bowl, or I'll watch the World Series or something like that. But I'm not a big sports fan. But then my son was playing football, and we had a chance to go see the Charger game, which is the San Diego NFL team. And so we got a chance to go see the Chargers, and I took him to go see the Chargers. Now here's one of the things. Football's not important to me, but my son is important to me. I love him, and football's important to him. Because football's important to him, it's important to me. I may know nothing about it. I do know something about it. But I warned him on the way there. I said, now I may have to ask you a lot of questions about what's going on, because I know the basics of the game, but I don't know the details of the game. And I let him know. It's like, you know that I don't usually watch football. Just so you understand, this isn't a huge sacrifice for me. I'm going to have fun being there at the game. But the reason I'm going is I love you. You are important to me, and football's important to you. And if football's important to you, it's important to me because it's important to you. So there I am at a football game. Now, a man who is considerably more wealthy than I am had a similar thing. He was more of an intellectual. He was someone who worked with his mind and his creativity a lot more. He had a son who loved baseball. And ultimately what he ended up doing as a special gift to his son as his son got older is he traveled the nation, and a little bit in Canada, and they went and saw a baseball game in every stadium in Major League Baseball. And someone says, well, I had no idea you like baseball that much. He says, I don't like baseball that much. I like my son that much. That's part of parenting. A man ready for a woman, a wife, and a family. And a man ready for a career and a life. A man who's ready to have a job A man who's ready to have a career, a man who's ready to live his life is part of what we're after here. And so that's what we want to land at. Now, for the things of having a boy grow up to be ready for a career, I mean, we do that pretty much already. We say things like, well, go to college and graduate from college and get a good job. Now, I'm going to toss something out here that I contend that the reason for getting an education isn't just to get a good job. The reason to get a good education is to be educated. It is to be educated. And being educated opens more doors for you. It gives you more opportunity, but it doesn't guarantee you a job. I mean, it is perfectly okay to be a college graduate and go get exactly the same job you might have gotten if you were a high school graduate. That's okay. It's okay to start a business that doesn't need your degree, to get a job unconnected to your degree, because the whole purpose of the education was to be educated. Now, in some cases, you need the education in order to get a job. I mean, I'm a lawyer. In order for me to become a lawyer, I had to go to law school, get a law degree, and then I had to sit for the bar exam. If someone's a doctor, well, they had to go to medical school. Or someone's a dentist, they had to go to dental school. And so, in a lot of cases, the job that they eventually have is closely connected to the education. But just because someone went to dental school doesn't mean they have to be a dentist. I know someone that went to law school and medical school, and she's a lawyer, but not a doctor. Is that okay? Sure, that's okay. What if at some point she doesn't want to be a lawyer anymore? Is that okay? Yeah, that's okay. It doesn't lock you in. It's not just like a credential for the job you have to take. We don't live in that kind of country. We have more freedom than that. But we want a man who's ready for a career, and a man who's ready for life, who's not just so fixated on the money, so fixated on the career path, so fixated on business, that he forgets to build a life. And that's part of what we want for our sons, to be ready to live that life.